You know what is funny? This episode is called The Dream Begins, and yet I am sitting here waiting for the nightmare to finally end. Nothing about this feels like a dream unless we are talking about the kind where you wake up stressed and annoyed. We are 6 episodes deep into this arc, and somehow it still feels like nothing important has happened. Only 1 episode remains after this, and the finish line is finally in sight. At this point, I am not excited for the story. I am excited for freedom. I wish I did not have to suffer through this train wreck. I wish I could be free of this pain. Then I remember that nothing worthwhile ever comes easy. Every great hero had to endure something unbearable. That is why people remember their names. Achilles had to fight in the Trojan War. Jason had to chase the Golden Fleece. Perseus had to kill Medusa and save Andromeda from a sea monster. Hercules had to survive 12 labors that would crush any normal person. Odysseus had to face gods and monsters just to get home. And here I am staring down the mother's Rosario of Sword Art Online. Different scale, same struggle. History will remember their trials. Mine will be sitting through this arc and keeping my sanity intact. There's nothing about this disaster that is remotely like a dream. If anything, it feels like a long, drawn-out fever dream where logic stops working and the only escape is the end credits. Dreams are supposed to be interesting or inspiring. This is just exhausting. The title promises wonder, but all it delivers is frustration and the slow realization that I still have to sit through the rest of it. I keep wondering what I did to deserve the punishment of having to suffer through this dumpster fire. I must have committed some unforgivable crime in a past life. Maybe I kicked a sacred puppy. Or maybe I insulted the wrong deity and the universe decided this was my sentence. Whatever it was, this arc feels less like entertainment and more like cosmic payback. Episode after episode, the suffering continues. And all I can do is sit here and reflect on my past sins while the show tests. How much patience a human being can realistically have. I honestly do not even think Sword Art Online is a real show. It feels more like some government experiment designed to test how much trash one person can endure before completely losing their mind. Every episode adds another layer of nonsense, like they are slowly turning up the heat to see when the subject finally breaks. At this point, I am half expecting a clipboard guy to come to my room and say, "Congratulations, you made it further than most people." This is not entertainment. This is psychological endurance training disguised as anime. I genuinely think forcing someone to watch Sword Art Online should qualify as cruel and unusual punishment. This arc feels less like a show and more like an endurance test, where the goal is to see how long a person can sit through nonsense before their brain gives up. At least other punishments end eventually. This just keeps going episode after episode, daring you to quit while pretending it is meaningful art. I am not religious. I do not believe a god exists because if one did, Sword Art Online would never have been allowed to exist in the first place. If a god is all-powerful, all-knowing, and even slightly merciful, this franchise would have been stopped at the concept stage. The fact that it made it this far, with this many arcs and movies, tells me everything I need to know. Either no higher power is watching, or they checked out a long time ago and left us alone with this mess. If I could go back in time, the only thing I would change is stopping the creation of Sword Art Online. I would not chase money or fame. I would not try to fix history or save the world. I would simply prevent this franchise from ever seeing the light of day. One small change, one act of mercy for humanity. Think of all the hours saved, all the arguments avoided, all the brain cells spared. History would thank me. If I had all of the Infinity Stones, I would not wipe out half of all life in the universe like Thanos did. That would be unnecessary. I would simply erase Sword Art Online from existence. One snap, clean and efficient, no collateral damage. The universe would wake up confused but improved. No lost lives, no chaos, just one less terrible franchise and a noticeable rise in overall quality of fiction. Honestly, that feels like a far more responsible use of unlimited power. Suffering through this show has to be one of the most difficult trials a human being can face these days. Right up there with training to become a K-pop idol. At least idols who finally manage to debut get music, choreography, fame, devoted fans, and a big fat paycheck at the end. Sword Art Online offers nothing but exhaustion and regret. It is a black hole of entertainment that drains your energy, your time, your patience, and your sanity one episode at a time. You do not watch it, you endure it. By the end, you are not entertained, you are simply tired. Staring at the screen like someone who has just run an emotional marathon for absolutely no reason. There is literally nothing good about this arc. Nothing. Not the writing, not the pacing, not the characters, not the forced emotions. And yet Sword Art Online fans hail it as the greatest thing ever made, which is honestly baffling. You are more likely to find a lost city of Atlantis than to find a genuinely well-written moment here. The praise makes no sense unless the standards are buried somewhere deep underground. Calling this arc great is not an opinion. It is a confession that you will clap at anything as long as sad music plays in the background. The episode begins with Kirito sitting around with two random students talking about a device he somehow built, and it is such a baffling scene. Mechatronics is not a normal class in a Japanese high school, so right away the show feels fake and out of touch. It is another moment where Kirito has to look like a genius at everything for no real reason. The scene adds nothing to the story and only exists to remind the viewer that Kirito is special and smarter than everyone else. It feels like the author patting himself on the back instead of telling a good story, and it sets the tone for an arc that keeps making strange choices and expecting the audience to just accept them. Most Japanese high schools are general academic schools, and their classes are things like math, Japanese, English, science, history, and basic electives. Mechatronics is usually taught only at technical or vocational high schools, where students focus on engineering, robotics, or industrial skills. Even there, it is part of a specialized track, not a casual classroom subject. The author is Japanese, which makes this even worse. He should know what classes are taught in a Japanese high school because he almost certainly went to one himself. This is not some foreign writer guessing wrong or a simple mistake caused by culture or language. This is just him making stuff up and hoping no one notices. It feels lazy and careless, like he did not bother to check his own setting. When a writer cannot get basic school life right in his own country, it becomes hard to take anything else seriously. And it makes the scene feel fake before it even has a chance to matter. And the fact that Kirito somehow invented this device is just dumb. It is not enough that he is the strongest player in the game, has the best and most special items, is the highest level, and can do things nobody else ever thinks of. Now he also has to be a real-life genius who invents advanced tech on the side. There is no build-up, no effort, and no limit to what he can do. The story bends over backward to make him good at everything. And it stops feeling like a character and starts feeling like a wish list. When one person can do it all with no cost or struggle, it kills any tension and makes the whole thing feel silly. Even if we pretend that mechatronics is a normal class at this school, it still makes no sense for Kirito to know how to invent this tech right away. You do not become an expert just by showing up to a few classes and listening to a teacher talk. Learning how to design and build new tech takes years of study, practice, and failure. The show skips all of that and just hands Kirito the skills because the plot wants it. It feels rushed, lazy, and fake, and it once again proves that the story cares more about making Kirito look amazing than about anything that feels real or earned. The author obviously wants Kirito to invent the technology in his other series, Axel World, as well, which takes place in the future. It is painfully obvious that this is just fan service and cross-promotion rather than a logical plot point. Instead of making sense within Sword Art Online, the story bends reality to make Kirito look like a genius inventor in real life, stretching believability to absurd levels just to tie the universes together. And it is funny how the other two students do not even get names. They are not characters at all, just faceless background props who exist only to stand there and nod while Kirito looks cool. They have no role, no thoughts, and no purpose beyond making him seem smarter and more important. It is such a cheap trick, and it makes the scene feel hollow and staged. When everyone else exists only to hype up one guy, it stops being a story and starts feeling like pure self-praise. Asuna looks at a watch on her wrist, even though she also has a smartphone that can already tell the time, and it just looks stupid. Why is she wearing a watch at all when it serves no purpose? It is pointless and distracting, and it feels like the scene was not thought through for even a second. This kind of detail matters because it shows how careless the writing is. The show wants to look modern, but cannot keep its own logic straight, so it piles on tech without thinking about how people actually use it. It is small, but it adds to the growing list of dumb and unnecessary choices that make the whole arc feel sloppy and half-baked. Asuna gets impatient and asks how much longer it will take because her lunch break is almost over. And it just makes her come off like a whiny and entitled brat. These other students are helping her for free out of basic kindness. And all she does is sit there and complain about the time. There is no thanks, no patience, and no respect for the fact that they are doing her a favor. The scene makes her look rude and selfish for no reason, and it feels like the writer did not think about how this behavior would come across. Instead of building sympathy, it just makes her harder to like. None of the characters in this show are even remotely likable. They act annoying, rude, and selfish, and yet for some reason lots of viewers treat them like heroes and put them on a pedestal. That is absolutely laughable. Watching people worship characters who do nothing but complain, show off, or act entitled is baffling, and it makes the fandom feel completely out of touch with reality. The show seems to reward bad behavior and call it cool, and the result is a cast that is impossible to care about while still somehow being glorified. Yuki is able to hear everything, so why on earth did Asuna and Yuki even need to log into the game to talk at the end of the previous episode? They could just talk in the real world like normal people, and it would work perfectly. The whole scene makes no sense and feels completely pointless. It is another example of the show forcing drama where none is needed, just to pad the story and make the game feel more important than it actually is. Moments like this highlight how sloppy and thoughtless the writing really is. And what even is the point of this device? Yuki can already see everything perfectly from her virtual space. It would have been so much simpler if Asuna was just live streaming from her phone and Yuki watched that. There would be no need to invent some complicated gadget that adds nothing to the story. The device exists only to make the plot look fancier than it is, and it ends up feeling pointless, overcomplicated, and completely unnecessary. And like I said in the video for the previous episode, if highly advanced technology like this casually exists in this universe, then how have they not figured out a cure for AIDS yet? It makes no sense at all. The show wants us to believe that Kirito can invent impossible devices in a school lab, but real-world problems that actually matter are ignored. It is another example of the story being completely inconsistent and picking and choosing what technology works, just to make the plot convenient. It is absolutely hilarious how Kirito tells Asuna to try not to make any sudden moves because it will lag like crazy, and literally the very next thing she does is stand up quickly. The show tries to make this a funny moment, but it just comes off as lazy writing and bad timing. It highlights how little attention the writers pay to consistency, as the warning is immediately broken for the sake of a cheap gag. It is also pathetic how this arc is supposed to focus more on Asuna, give her the spotlight, and make her the main character. Yet she cannot do a single important thing without Kirito stepping in to save the day and help her out. Every moment that should showcase her strength or independence is stolen by him, making her supposed character growth meaningless. It is lazy, insulting, and yet another example of how the writers cannot let a female character shine on her own. Yuki acts surprised because the school looks ginormous, but it honestly just looks like a normal Japanese high school. There's absolutely nothing interesting or exciting about it, and yet the show tries really hard to make it seem impressive. It is forced and ridiculous, as if the writers think viewers will be wowed by a building that looks exactly like every other school they have ever seen. This is another example of the arc trying to hype up nothing and failing completely, making even small moments feel fake and hollow. Yuki has been playing countless other virtual reality online games and has seen massive structures and incredible buildings that would make the jaws of most players drop. So why on earth does a normal Japanese high school amaze her so much? It makes no sense and highlights how the show constantly exaggerates the mundane just to try and manufacture awe or emotion. It is forced, ridiculous, and yet another example of the lazy writing in this arc. Asuna goes to the faculty room to introduce Yuki to the teachers, and it makes no sense at all. Why would the teachers care about meeting some random new student who is not even there in person? The scene feels completely pointless and tacked on, like it only exists to fill time or make the story seem more official. It adds nothing to the plot, nothing to the characters, and just drags the pacing down while making the whole arc feel more and more pointless. Did they seriously have to make this teacher squint the whole time? It comes across as lazy, offensive, and a tired stereotype about Asian people. It adds nothing to the story or character and only makes the scene feel uncomfortable and cheap. Using visual shortcuts like that to get a laugh or make someone recognizable is not clever. It is just insulting and makes the writing look even more careless. The writer is Japanese, and the production staff are Japanese as well, so how did they think this was okay? This is not some outsider misunderstanding the culture. It is people from the same culture, putting something offensive and lazy on screen and thinking no one would notice. It is baffling, careless, and embarrassing. And it makes the whole scene feel even worse because it was entirely avoidable. And this is not even the first or second time it has happened. One member of the Moonlit Black Cats and another member of the Sleeping Knights constantly squinted as well. It is a repeated, lazy visual gag that does nothing but lean on a stereotype, and it makes the show look careless and insensitive. When a pattern like this keeps appearing, it stops feeling like an accident and starts feeling like the creators do not care about how it comes across at all. The teacher is completely fine with Yuki joining the class, but in real life this would never happen. A teacher would not just randomly let a new student sit in and participate without any official paperwork. It is another example of the show ignoring reality for the sake of convenience, and it makes the scene feel unrealistic and lazy. Moments like this pile on the disbelief, making it hard to take anything in the story seriously. The other students in the class are all curious about the device, but in reality nobody would care. Most students would just mind their own business and keep doing what they were doing. The show blows this up into a big dramatic moment for no reason, and it feels completely unrealistic. It is just another way the arc tries to make ordinary things seem exciting, and it ends up looking forced and silly instead. And now we are stuck in a boring school scene. What does this have to do with Sword Art Online? Oh right, nothing at all. Instead of high-stakes life-or-death action, we get mundane classroom chatter and pointless interactions. It is dull, unnecessary, and drags down the tension of the show. Scenes like this make the arc feel like it has forgotten what made the series exciting in the first place. Why would you call a show Sword Art Online when most of it does not even take place in Sword Art Online? That would be like calling a movie Star Wars when half of it is set on Earth with regular people doing boring stuff. It is misleading, lazy, and shows that the writers do not care about staying true to the premise of their own series. The title promises one thing, but the story keeps wandering into irrelevant and dull territory that has nothing to do with the game. The characters read a story by the Japanese writer Renosuke Akutagawa. Normally in school scenes, the story they are reading has some thematic connection to the actual plot. But what does this story have to do with anything? Absolutely nothing. It feels completely random and tacked on, like the writers just wanted to show the characters reading something serious without thinking about how it ties into the story. It is another pointless detail that adds nothing and makes the scene feel hollow. The story is about railway laborers and how the writer wishes to join them. It is supposed to symbolize how Yuki wishes to join the real world as well, but it does not fit at all. The connection is forced and awkward, and it feels like the writers are trying too hard to make a deep meaning where there is none. Instead of adding emotional weight, it just highlights how poorly thought out the scene is. And why did the teacher call on Yuki to read the story? It is not like she was raising her hand or volunteering. The scene makes no sense and feels completely forced. It is just another example of the writers bending reality to get Yuki into the spotlight, and it makes the classroom feel staged and unnatural instead of believable. Asuna starts crying, which is honestly hilarious. What is supposed to be so sad about this? The scene tries to force emotion, but it comes off as ridiculous because nothing meaningful has happened to justify it. It feels fake and over the top, like the writers are just waving a tearful moment in front of the audience and expecting them to feel something. Instead, it makes the whole arc look melodramatic and silly. The other students love listening to Yuki read, which is so dumb. They are not real characters at all, just background NPCs whose only purpose is to praise the main characters. They sit there going on and on about how amazing Yuki is, and it feels completely fake and forced. Instead of adding depth or realism, these students exist only to make the heroes look good, and it makes the whole scene hollow and ridiculous. Yuki thanks Asuna and says she had a blast? Really? Attending a boring school lesson and reading a passage from a book is supposed to be exciting to her? This is the same girl who has spent the past 3 years continuously full diving in various virtual reality games, fighting bosses, and experiencing life or death adventures. Somehow, sitting in a classroom is supposed to feel thrilling, and it comes off as completely absurd. The scene makes her reaction feel fake and forced, like the writers are trying too hard to manufacture emotion where there is none. It would make a lot more sense if it were the other way around. If Yuki had spent the past several years in school and now Asuna was showing her what a virtual reality game is like, that would actually feel interesting. But no, the show flips it completely. Putting a girl who has lived in full-dive virtual reality for years into a boring classroom and acting like it is exciting. It makes no sense and highlights how poorly thought out the whole arc is. And while we are on that topic, how is Yuki even able to continuously full dive for 3 years straight? Back in Sword Art Online, the players were trapped for 2 years. And there was a scene where Kirito said their bodies were deteriorating in the real world. They could not keep going like that forever. If full diving non-stop for 2 years was already pushing human limits, then how is Yuki somehow doing it for 3 years without any serious consequences? It makes no sense and completely ignores the rules and logic the series itself established. Yuki says that she will never forget today ever, but what was so interesting that it is worth remembering? Sitting in a boring classroom and reading a passage from a book is hardly memorable. Most people do not remember anything from their own time in high school, so why is this supposed to be such a life-changing moment for her? It comes across as forced and ridiculous. Like the writers are trying to manufacture sentiment instead of letting it happen naturally. Asuna brings Yuki to her old house, and Yuki talks about her backstory as if we are supposed to care. But we do not. How is the audience supposed to feel anything for someone they barely know? Also, instead of having Yuki just tell us what happened, why not actually show it? A little visual storytelling would go a long way. Show, do not tell. But no, that would require actual effort and planning, so the writers take the easy way out and have Yuki just explain everything in dialogue. It is lazy, unengaging, and makes the whole scene feel hollow. And this whole scene is so forced. They just pile on sadness after sadness, trying desperately to make you feel something, but I do not feel anything. It is all hollow and manipulative, like the writers are waving tragedy in front of the audience and expecting tears on demand. Instead of creating real emotion, it comes off as fake, overdone, and exhausting to watch. The house is going to be torn down because the aunt of Yuki wants to either put a convenience store here or sell the land. Yuki wanted to come see the house one last time before it got demolished. Yet another moment where the show is clearly trying to manipulate the audience. It is not enough that Yuki is terminally ill and running out of time, but now her old house is going to be torn down too. The scene piles on tragedy for no reason, turning her life into one sad obstacle after another, and it comes off as heavy-handed and exhausting instead of moving. Asuna mentions that Yuki is 15, but in the previous episode, the doctor said she was born in May 2011. Since the story takes place in January 2026, that would make her 14, not 15. It is a small detail, but it shows sloppy writing and a lack of attention to even basic facts. Little mistakes like this pile up and make the world feel careless and inconsistent. Asuna tells Yuki that when she turns 16, she should find someone she loves and marry him so he can prevent the house from being torn down. That is a really insensitive and tone-deaf thing to say to someone who is terminally ill and does not have much time left. Yuki is not going to make it to 16. The doctor in the previous episode already told Asuna that Yuki is going to die soon. Instead of offering comfort or understanding, the show has Asuna say something completely unrealistic and hurtful, making the scene feel awkward, forced, and emotionally tone-deaf. Oh, and in Japan, parental consent is required for anyone under the age of 20 to get married. So even if Yuki somehow turned 16, she still could not marry anyone without her parents approving it. The idea that marriage is some simple solution she could just fall back on is completely unrealistic. It ignores the legal reality and makes the comment of Asuna feel even more careless and out of touch with the situation. And we already know from the previous episode that the parents of Yuki are dead, so they could not approve it anyway. That makes the whole idea even more pointless and thoughtless. The show brings up marriage as if it is a real option, while ignoring its own story and the legal reality. It just adds another layer of sloppy writing and makes the scene feel even more tone-deaf and poorly thought out. Why did they even need to include this scene at all? It adds nothing and only makes the show look bad to anyone who actually knows the culture. Once again, the author is Japanese, so he should know better than to write something this careless and out of touch. Instead of adding depth or meaning, the scene just exposes how sloppy and poorly thought out the writing really is. And we know that Asuna is rich, so why not just have her family buy the land so the house does not get torn down? That would make far more sense and solve the problem instantly. But no, instead the author forces in some stupid dialogue to try and sound emotional. It is another case where a simple, logical solution is ignored just so the story can squeeze out fake drama, and it ends up feeling contrived and silly instead of touching. Yuki says that she wants to marry Asuna, but that is not even legal in Japan. Same-gender marriage is not recognized there, so the line falls apart the moment you think about it for more than 2 seconds. It is another empty attempt to sound emotional without caring about reality, law, or consistency. The show throws out big dramatic lines and expects the audience to clap, even when the idea makes no sense in the world it is set in. Instead of being touching, it just comes off as sloppy and poorly thought out. Again, the author is Japanese. He should know these things. Why would you write a story set in Japan and then ignore basic laws, customs, and everyday reality? It makes the writing feel careless and disconnected from its own setting. When an author cannot get simple cultural details right in a story based in his own country, it becomes hard to take anything else seriously. I am not even Japanese and I have never lived in Japan, yet I was able to find all of this information online in a few seconds. The fact that the author, who is Japanese and lives in Japan, does not know or bother with these basic details is downright embarrassing. It shows a shocking level of carelessness and laziness in the writing, relying on ignorance instead of doing even the smallest bit of research to make the story believable. And why is Yuki so attached to Asuna in the first place? They literally just met less than a week ago in the story. This level of emotional attachment makes no sense and feels completely unearned. The show rushes their bond at lightning speed and expects the audience to accept it as deep and meaningful. There is no time spent building trust or connection, just instant closeness because the plot demands it. It feels fake, forced, and lazy. Like the writers skipped all the hard work and jumped straight to the payoff. That is the core problem with Sword Art Online. It constantly tries to speedrun relationships. Characters meet, exchange a few words, and are suddenly best friends or deeply bonded like they have known each other for years. There is no slow build, no natural growth, just instant attachment because the story wants quick emotions. It feels rushed and unearned, and it makes every supposed emotional moment fall flat. Yuki would need Asuna to be the wife, or else her name would be Yuki, which would sound weird. So did the author really give this new character the same last name as Asuna just for a cheap throwaway joke? If so, that is incredibly dumb and lazy. Instead of thinking through names and meaning, it feels like the writer worked backward from a bad joke and shaped the character around it. It is another moment that breaks immersion and makes the writing feel careless rather than clever. And again, the joke does not even land because same-gender marriage is not legally recognized in Japan to begin with. Legally, Yuki and Asuna cannot get married at all. So any punchline built around marriage and sharing a last name falls completely flat. Never mind the fact that Yuki is underage. Layering an illegal, impossible situation on top of a minor makes the joke feel not just unrealistic, but also awkward, inappropriate, and completely tone-deaf. Instead of being funny or clever, it highlights how careless and poorly thought out the writing is. And we know that Asuna is in love with Kirito. So why is the show wasting time pretending that Yuki has a chance with her? Even if it were legal in Japan? It makes no sense and adds nothing to the story. This forced subplot is just another example of the writers padding the arc with meaningless drama, ignoring established relationships, and treating the audience like they will buy into something completely ridiculous. Yuki says she has a feeling that Kirito is not living in the real world either. It is another dumb, throwaway line that exists solely to make Kirito seem cooler. It adds nothing to the story, develops no character, and feels completely forced. The show keeps inserting these little ego-boosting moments for Kirito instead of focusing on real plot or meaningful interactions, and it comes off as shallow and ridiculous. Yuki talks about how she used to go to church to pray with her family, and how her mom would tell her that God would never put them through all this suffering if he did not think they could bear it. It is a dumb filler scene meant to pad the episode and add fake emotional weight. It does not reveal anything important about Yuki, her situation, or the plot, and it comes off as forced and shallow. Instead of creating real depth or connection, it just slows the pacing and feels like busy work for the sake of drama. Also in Japan, belief in God in the Western sense is not common at all. Most Japanese people practice a blend of Shinto and Buddhist traditions, which focus on rituals, ancestor worship, seasonal festivals, and living in harmony with nature, rather than worshiping a single all-powerful deity who intervenes in human affairs. Even when religion is part of daily life, it is more about custom and cultural practice than personal faith in a God who controls fate or judges human suffering. Christianity does exist in Japan, but it is a tiny minority, making up only about 1 to 2% of the population. Some people may participate in Christian-style weddings, Christmas celebrations, or other Western-style religious events, but this is largely cultural rather than spiritual. Personal belief in a God who actively shapes life or punishes and rewards people, as in the typical Western religious narrative, is very rare. Because of this, a scene where a Japanese character talks about God directly guiding or testing them through suffering, like Yuki does, is culturally unusual and feels unrealistic for most Japanese audiences. It clashes with the norms of Japanese religion and everyday belief, and it can make the dialogue feel forced or imported from a foreign worldview rather than natural to their setting. The show is essentially applying a Western idea of God to a Japanese character in a way that does not match reality, which weakens the emotional authenticity of the scene. Accuracy has never been a top priority for this show, and this scene confirms it. From cultural details to basic logic, the writers throw consistency out the window just to force a plot point or an emotional moment. It is sloppy, careless, and yet another reminder that Sword Art Online cares far more about convenience and cheap drama than creating a believable or coherent world. And the phrase, "God would never put them through all this suffering if he did not think they could bear it," is pretty stupid and ridiculous. It is a classic example of survivorship bias. The idea assumes that the people who survive extreme hardships are somehow stronger or specially chosen, but it completely ignores the fact that many others who face the same suffering did not survive. In reality, those who could not bear it are simply gone, and that has nothing to do with their strength, character, or divine favor. Framing suffering this way is not only illogical, it is also manipulative, trying to make the audience feel that surviving or enduring tragedy is inherently meaningful or virtuous, when in truth it is often just random luck or circumstance. In the case of Yuki, this line is especially absurd and tone-deaf given that she is terminally ill. Her suffering is not some trial or test that she can push through. It is a harsh, unavoidable reality that will end her life. Framing it as though she is somehow strong or chosen to endure, it ignores the genuine tragedy of her situation and turns her pain into a forced moral lesson. Pretending that her illness is a test she can bear cheapens the moment, stripping away any real emotion or empathy the audience might feel. Instead of highlighting her humanity or the gravity of her condition, the scene tries to manufacture inspiration out of genuine tragedy, and it comes across as manipulative, shallow, and painfully unrealistic. And I guess that quote explains why I have to continue watching this dumpster fire of a show and ripping it apart. I can bear it, so apparently God, who I do not even personally believe in because I am not religious, has put me through it. It is ridiculous, ironic, and perfectly sums up the kind of forced, over-the-top deep moments this show tries to sell as meaningful. Instead of inspiring anything, it just highlights how absurd and painful the experience really is. There is a shot of the stars in the night sky. It is clearly meant to feel grand and timeless, but it just comes off as cliché and pretentious. Instead of inspiring awe or wonder, it feels like the show is trying too hard to force emotion through a pretty image. The moment lacks context or real weight, so all the grandeur falls flat, leaving the scene feeling empty and unearned. Yuki now realizes that her mom was praying for her to not feel sorry for herself and to stay strong until the end. This is way too sappy and melodramatic. It feels like the show is deliberately piling on emotional cliches instead of letting the audience connect naturally with her struggle. Instead of being moving, it comes across as forced and manipulative, trying to manufacture tears with over-the-top sentiment rather than real storytelling. Yuki explains that since she does not have much time left, she just says exactly how she feels to everyone, and if they have a problem with it, she does not care. What lesson is the show even trying to teach here? That you should speak without thinking and not be held accountable for anything you say? That there are no consequences for your words? It is a terrible, irresponsible lesson, and it makes the behavior of Yuki feel self-indulgent rather than inspiring. Instead of showing maturity or meaningful insight, the scene comes across as sloppy and morally tone-deaf. Yuki should care because people are still going to talk about you after you are gone. If you were a good person, people will remember that, and if you hurt or upset others, that will also linger. Your words and actions have consequences, even if you do not live long enough to face them yourself. Pretending that it is fine to speak without thought or care, as the show suggests, completely ignores this reality. It is another example of the arc trying to manufacture wisdom while actually promoting a shallow and irresponsible message. No wonder why Sword Art Online fans can be so rude and toxic. They see characters like Yuki saying whatever they want without caring about the consequences and take it as a model to follow. The show constantly glorifies selfishness, entitlement, and thoughtless behavior, and some fans seem to absorb that message wholeheartedly. Thanks to this garbage show for teaching people that they can act however they want and that the world will just roll over for them. It is a terrible example all around. This show is actively harming the audience, and most viewers do not even realize it. They mindlessly consume this trash as if it is the pinnacle of storytelling, blindly accepting all the lazy writing, forced drama, and terrible messages, instead of thinking critically or noticing how awful the characters and plot really are. They idolize the nonsense on screen and treat it like wisdom. It is toxic, manipulative, and deeply frustrating to watch how easily people are swayed by something so shallow and poorly made. Asuna says that the reason she and Yuki are so close after only a few days is because of her. But Yuki replies that it is because Asuna tracked her down even after she ran away. As explained in the video for the previous episode, Asuna was only able to track Yuki down because of several major plot conveniences and coincidences. Kirito just happened to know where Yuki was, and Yuki just happened to be nearby. In real life, the other player you randomly meet in an online game could be halfway across the world from you, making this entire bonding moment feel completely unrealistic and forced. The show expects the audience to accept an impossibly convenient situation as the foundation for a deep emotional connection, and it falls flat because it ignores reality entirely. Also, this bonding moment between Asuna and Yuki would have worked much better if it had happened earlier in the show. If the audience had seen them genuinely connect over time, we could understand why Asuna would be so heartbroken when Yuki ended contact with her. Placing it here after they have already reconciled and spent time together makes no sense. It feels out of place and loses any real emotional impact. The timing ruins the potential of the scene, turning what could have been a touching moment into another awkward, forced attempt at sentimentality. Yuki suggests that Asuna talk to her mom and tell her how she really feels. How did Asuna not think of that already? That is the most basic, obvious thing to do, and yet she had to wait for Yuki to suggest it. It makes Asuna look clueless and the scene feel contrived, like the writers needed a convenient way to move the plot along instead of letting the characters act logically or naturally. It is another example of lazy storytelling disguised as emotional insight. Yuki tells Asuna that she is way stronger than her. It is yet another scene where the show has to have another character explicitly state how strong Asuna is. She cannot just be strong on her own. Her abilities and importance are constantly validated by others telling the audience about them. It is lazy writing forcing admiration instead of showing it through actions, and it makes the strength of Asuna feel less earned and more like a constantly repeated talking point. Asuna goes back home and talks to her mom. She gives her mom an Ainyu sphere so they can log into the virtual world and talk. Where did Asuna even get another Ainyu sphere? Nobody else in her family plays online virtual reality games, and yet she just had a spare lying around this whole time. This completely undermines the threat of her mom confiscating her Ainyu sphere in one of the previous episodes. If Asuna already had another one, it would not really matter if the first was taken away, making the earlier tension feel empty and pointless. It is another example of sloppy writing and convenience being prioritized over consistency or stakes. Asuna allows her mom to log into her alt account in the game. So account sharing is allowed in Alfheim Online? That is completely unrealistic. In any real online game, sharing accounts is strictly against the rules for several important reasons. First, it gives players an unfair advantage. Someone could gain access to high-level characters, rare items, or special abilities without putting in the time and effort themselves. Second, it creates major security risks. If an account is shared, there is a much higher chance of hacking, theft, or cheating, which can compromise both the player and the integrity of the game. Third, account sharing can ruin the balance and fairness of competitive play, as other players are competing under the assumption that every account is being used by a single person following the rules. Finally, it complicates responsibility. If something goes wrong or a rule is broken, it is unclear who is accountable. Ignoring all of this, the show casually allows the mom of Asuna to use an alt account, which makes the virtual world feel inconsistent, poorly thought out, and unconvincing. It is pretty obvious that the writer does not actually play online games, because if he did, he would know this rule. No experienced player would think that account sharing is acceptable. The fact that the anime ignores this shows a lack of first-hand knowledge and attention to detail, making the virtual world feel less believable and more like a convenient plot device than a consistent setting. And like I said in the video for the previous episode, if people could create alt accounts in Alfheim Online, it would have solved so many problems. For example, none of the races were able to reach the top of the world tree because they refused to cooperate and share the rewards. But if alt accounts were allowed, a player could just create a new character of a different race and help their friends directly. That would make the whole race conflict plot pointless, and it highlights how inconsistent and contrived the game rules are in the show. Instead of thinking through these mechanics, the writers ignore obvious solutions just to manufacture tension. And when did Asuna even make this alt account? Why does she have an alt account in the first place? It only exists for this scene and is never mentioned again for the rest of the series. It is a completely pointless plot device, created solely to move the story forward in the moment without any setup, explanation, or lasting significance. This kind of convenience highlights the lazy, inconsistent writing that Sword Art Online relies on far too often. Asuna logs into Alfheim Online herself, but why does she have to say link start before logging in when her mom did not have to say anything? It makes no sense and highlights the inconsistent rules of the show for the game. If simply putting on the Amusphere and activating it is enough to log in, then requiring a verbal command is unnecessary. Moments like this make the mechanics of the virtual world feel sloppy and poorly thought out, as if the writers are inventing rules on the spot to look cool rather than maintaining any internal consistency. Asuna talks to her mom in-game, and the first thing she says is how the avatar weighs less than her real body, which is just rude. Instead of starting the conversation with something kind or thoughtful, she opens with a comment that comes off as insensitive and shallow. It makes her seem careless and self-centered, and it sets a tone that is awkward and uncomfortable for what should be a meaningful interaction between mother and daughter. The mom of Asuna says that her face in-game looks just like her real one, but Alfheim Online does not allow character customization. Avatars are supposed to have randomized appearances. The fact that the avatar of Asuna looks exactly like she does in real life is a major plot hole. Of course, this is just another case of the rules conveniently not applying to the main characters, letting them do whatever the story needs while the rest of the world has to follow the normal limitations. It makes the virtual world feel inconsistent and highlights how lazy the writing can be when it comes to internal logic. Dumb people are probably going to try and defend it by saying she just happened to get an avatar that looks exactly like she does in real life. But the chances of that actually happening are astronomically low. In a system where appearances are randomized, the odds of an avatar perfectly matching the face of a real person are basically zero. Pretending it is plausible just exposes how lazy and convenient the writing really is, bending the rules of the world to serve the main character instead of keeping any sense of realism. Asuna opens the window and has her mom look outside. It is supposed to bring back memories of the house that her grandma and grandpa had. So the outside of the house that Asuna bought in-game just happens to look exactly like the house of her grandparents. That is absurd. The show relies so heavily on plot conveniences that it makes the world feel completely contrived. Everything has to line up perfectly for the story to happen, and any deviation from this rigid setup would apparently break the narrative. It is lazy storytelling at its worst, sacrificing logic and realism just to manufacture a sentimental moment. The reason Asuna bought this house is because it was the same house she bought with Kirito back in Sword Art Online. But now the show throws us this curveball, claiming it also resembles the house of her grandparents out of nowhere. It is yet another example of lazy storytelling and forced sentimentality. bending the world to create a touching moment instead of letting it happen naturally. The connection feels completely contrived and highlights how the writers rely on convenience rather than coherent planning. The story would not work if it did not look like the house of her grandparents, so of course it does. Otherwise, the whole sentimental moment falls apart. It is another clear example of the show bending reality and ignoring logic just to force an emotional beat, making the world feel contrived and the storytelling lazy. And of course, they are just talking in the same house that we have seen countless times. Instead of using a new location to make the scene feel fresh or exciting, the show reuses the same setting over and over. It makes the episode feel stagnant and visually boring, adding to the sense that everything in this arc is padded, repetitive, and completely unengaging. A flashback scene shows a young Asuna with her grandparents. It is supposed to make the viewer feel sentimental and nostalgic, but it just comes off as forced and cliché. Instead of evoking real emotion, the scene feels like a cheap attempt to tug at heartstrings without giving the audience a reason to care. The nostalgia is manufactured and hollow, making the moment fall flat rather than meaningful. They even added sad music to try and manipulate the audience into feeling emotional, but it only makes the scene feel even more forced. Instead of creating genuine sentiment, the music screams, "Feel sad now," in an obvious and heavy-handed way. It highlights how the show is trying to manufacture emotion rather than letting it emerge naturally from the story or characters, making the moment feel shallow and insincere. Asuna talks about a holiday when she was 12. Yet again, the show is just dumping exposition on the audience instead of actually showing anything. We are told about her past instead of experiencing it through visuals, interactions, or storytelling, which makes the scene feel boring and lazy. It is another example of the writers taking the easy way out, relying on dialogue to convey emotion instead of crafting moments that would actually make the audience care. Asuna tells her mom that grandma and grandpa were so proud of her. The show is trying way too hard to manufacture emotion with statements like this. Instead of letting the audience feel the pride and love naturally through actions or subtle storytelling, it just tells us directly what we are supposed to feel. It comes across as heavy-handed, clumsy, and manipulative, turning what could have been a touching moment into something awkward and unconvincing. They might as well just put text on the screen that says, "Feel sad and emotional now," for all the difference it makes. Simply telling the audience to feel something does not work. Emotion has to be earned through meaningful storytelling, character development, and situations the audience can actually relate to. Sword Art Online does none of that. It constantly expects viewers to care about events and characters without giving them any reason to, which makes every attempt at sentiment feel hollow and unconvincing. Like in my videos, I do not just say Sword Art Online is a bad show and expect you to believe me. I actually go in deep and rip it apart scene by scene, explaining every single thing it does wrong. From lazy writing and ridiculous plot conveniences to forced emotion and inconsistent world building, I break down exactly why the show fails, so you can see for yourself instead of taking my word for it. Asuna says that her mom left the village, went to university, became a scholar, and had her work published. Once again, the show is just having a character tell us things instead of actually showing them. Why should we care about any of it when we are only learning about it right now through dialogue? There is no connection, no build-up, and no emotional investment. Just lazy exposition dumped on the audience to fill in backstory without any effort or creativity. Asuna finally understands that life is not just about doing what makes you happy, but also about finding a way to live so that the happiness of everyone around you fulfills you too. Wow, the show is trying way too hard. It throws this heavy-handed moral at the audience instead of showing it through genuine experiences or character growth. The line feels forced, preachy, and completely manufactured, like the writers are desperate to make the scene profound without actually earning any of the emotion or insight. It does not work at all. Asuna has never shown the kind of depth or growth that would make this realization feel earned. The show suddenly drops this moral insight on her as if we are supposed to accept it without question, but it contradicts how she has behaved throughout the series. Instead of being a meaningful moment, it comes off as forced and hollow. Another example of Sword Art Online trying to manufacture emotion instead of letting it develop naturally. It is also funny how they just show scenes from previous episodes while Asuna is saying this. The animation cannot even be bothered to create new, fresh scenes, and yet we are supposed to buy into the moment as if it is meaningful. Reusing old footage like this feels lazy and cheap, and it makes the supposed emotional payoff fall flat. Instead of crafting something new to support the story, the show takes the easy way out, expecting the audience to fill in the gaps themselves. Young Asuna looks a lot like Kirino from Oraimo, which makes sense since both series were produced by the same studio. It is convenient for the animators, who can reuse assets and only have to change them slightly. This kind of shortcut saves time and effort, but it also makes the animation feel recycled and lazy, and it further emphasizes how little attention the show gives to originality or fully developing its own characters. Asuna says that she wants to live a life that makes everyone around her happy. A life that lets her be there for the people she cares about when they need someone to lean on. Give me a break. Asuna has never shown the kind of consistent, selfless behavior that would make this declaration believable. The show suddenly gives her this insight out of nowhere, expecting the audience to accept it at face value, but it feels completely forced and unearned. Instead of a natural growth moment, it comes off as empty preaching, and yet another example of Sword Art Online trying way too hard to manufacture emotion. The writer seems to think that just having a character say something vaguely profound is instantly going to make the audience feel something. It does not work that way. Emotion cannot be delivered through words alone. It has to be earned through actions, context, and believable character development. Sword Art Online constantly relies on this shortcut, dropping so-called deep lines without building any real connection or stakes, which makes the moments fall flat and leaves the audience feeling nothing instead of moved. The mom of Asuna suddenly starts crying, and sad music plays in the background. The show is trying way too hard to force emotion, but it comes off as completely manufactured. Instead of letting the audience connect with the moment naturally, it relies on cliches and heavy-handed cues to tell us how we are supposed to feel. The result is awkward, over-the-top, and unconvincing, making the scene feel more like a manipulation than a genuine emotional moment. Asuna tells her mom that she cannot hide her sadness in this world. That when she cries just like in real life. That is a terrible game design. Players should have control over their avatars and be able to express themselves how they choose, not have emotions forced to appear automatically. This mechanic removes agency, breaks immersion, and makes the game feel unrealistic and poorly thought out. Instead of being a fun or meaningful feature, it just serves as another convenient plot device for the writers. Asuna goes to eat breakfast with her mom the next morning. She is eating a sandwich for breakfast, which is pretty unusual. In Japan, typical breakfast foods include rice, miso soup, grilled fish, eggs, and pickled vegetables. While sandwiches exist and some people eat Western-style breakfasts, a sandwich is not the norm and feels out of place in a traditional Japanese household. The show could have reflected more realistic cultural habits, but instead it opts for a generic or convenient meal choice that says nothing about the setting or characters. Once again, the author is Japanese and lives in Japan. He should know that Japanese people do not typically eat sandwiches for breakfast. Showing Asuna casually eating a sandwich is culturally inaccurate. It is another example of the show ignoring real-life details for convenience, making the setting feel less authentic and the writing lazy. Asuna reaffirms that she wishes to live a selfless life, so her mom allows her to stay in the school. That is a complete 180. All it took for the mom of Asuna to change her mind was some hollow, poorly developed speech about being selfless. There is no real tension, reasoning, or believable persuasion. Just a convenient flip of the script to move the plot forward. It makes the decision of the mom feel rushed, shallow, and completely unearned, like the writers were more focused on wrapping up the scene than making it make sense. It is also incredibly convenient how everything ends happily and goes exactly the way Asuna wanted. In real life, things rarely work out so perfectly, and people do not get exactly what they hope for just because they wish it. The show wraps up the story with an unrealistic, tidy resolution that ignores the complexity of real emotions, relationships, and consequences. It feels forced and overly idealized, making the ending predictable and unearned rather than satisfying. It would have been much more believable if the mom of Asuna was still not convinced and Asuna had to actually work harder to earn her trust. A gradual, realistic struggle would have added tension and made the resolution feel earned. Instead, the show gives us a quick, Convenient turnaround that undermines the stakes and makes the growth of the characters feel shallow and rushed. It is another example of Sword Art Online taking the easy way out instead of building a story that feels authentic. And Asuna said that Yuki taught her that you have to fight for the things you believe in. Now the lesson is suddenly that you should talk things through. Sword Art Online cannot even keep its story or its messages straight. The show keeps flipping morals and life lessons from scene to scene without any consistency, making it impossible to take any of it seriously. It is sloppy, confusing, and completely undermines whatever emotional weight it is trying to create. Why is this even the big drama that the show decided to focus on? Instead of high-stakes battles in a virtual reality game, the entire plot revolves around whether or not Asuna is going to transfer schools. It is painfully mundane and completely uninteresting, compared to what the series is supposed to be about. Sword Art Online constantly wastes its potential on trivial conflicts, turning what should be an exciting, tense story into a drawn-out, boring school drama that no one asked for. Even if Asuna did have to transfer schools, she could still keep in contact with her friends through texting, calling, or playing online games together. It would not be the end of the world, and it certainly would not justify the overblown drama the show makes it out to be. The conflict is completely blown out of proportion, making the story feel petty and trivial instead of meaningful or engaging. This entire arc is just pointless filler garbage. None of it will matter in the long run. Nobody is going to care about what school Asuna goes to or what her mom thinks in the next arc or the one after that. It adds zero meaningful stakes, character growth, or plot development, and it only serves to waste time and frustrate the audience. Everything in this arc feels trivial, forced, and completely disconnected from the story that actually matters. This is also another scene where the characters are just sitting and talking to each other while eating or drinking. Nothing happens, no tension builds, and no real character development occurs. It is pure filler. The show keeps recycling these mundane moments as if casual chatter counts as meaningful storytelling, which makes the pacing drag and the audience lose any interest. Asuna talks while she is outside and you can see her breath. But why did they not show that in the previous episodes? It is a small detail, yet its sudden appearance here feels inconsistent and highlights how careless the animation can be. Moments like this make the world feel sloppy and unpolished, as if the creators only bother with details when it suits a scene, rather than maintaining any kind of consistency. Asuna runs to school, but if she is rich, why does she not have a personal driver or some other convenient way to get there? It makes no sense and feels like another missed opportunity to show her lifestyle realistically. Instead, the show forces her to perform ordinary, unnecessary tasks just to fill time, which highlights how inconsistent and careless the writing can be when it comes to character details. What a completely boring episode. Pretty much nothing happened. No real plot development, no exciting action, and no meaningful character growth. The whole thing drags along with filler scenes, pointless dialogue, and forced emotion, making it a slog to sit through. It feels like the writers just wanted to pad the episode without giving the audience anything worth remembering. The show is trying way too hard to seem sad and emotional. Instead of letting feelings develop naturally through the story or characters, it layers on cliches, dramatic music, and forced dialogue. The result comes across as hollow and manipulative, making it obvious that the show is telling the audience how to feel rather than actually earning any real emotion. The author does not understand the show, do not tell rule at all. All he does is have the characters say sad things and seems to think that is enough to make the audience feel something. It is not. Emotion cannot be delivered through dialogue alone. It has to be shown through actions, interactions, and context. By constantly relying on characters to tell us how to feel, the show comes across as lazy, shallow, and manipulative, leaving every emotional moment hollow and unconvincing. And why is this episode called The Dream Begins? What dream even begins in this episode? There is no real goal, exciting plot development, or meaningful journey that starts here. Instead, the episode is filled with boring school scenes, pointless exposition, and forced emotional moments. The title feels completely disconnected from the content, making it just another example of sloppy and meaningless storytelling. This episode could have been over in 5 minutes, but they had to stretch it to 20 like they were being paid by the minute or something. Every scene drags on with pointless dialogue, filler, and forced emotional beats that add nothing to the story. It feels padded, tedious, and completely unnecessary, turning what could have been a brief, tolerable installment into a slog. Now let us see what people on Reddit had to say about this episode back when it first aired. The first comment says, "Imagine if Asuna trapped her mom in the virtual world, so she does not have to switch schools. That would have been hilarious. But Alfheim Online is not a death game where you can get trapped, so it would not make any sense at all. This is exactly why you do not let people on Reddit write stories. They throw out ridiculous ideas without thinking about logic, consistency, or the world the story is set in." This commenter thinks that the mom of Asuna will join the harem of Kirito, which is absolutely hilarious to imagine. Not only would Kirito have Asuna in his harem, but her mom too. Talk about taking the concept to an absurd extreme. It is the kind of ridiculous, over-the-top idea that highlights just how much some fans will blindly indulge in the already questionable dynamics of the show. One commenter thought it was ridiculous that a student asked Yuki if she liked soccer, since she has been hospitalized for most of her life. But other comments argued that there must be football games that exist in this world anyway, so it could make sense. It is funny to see fans trying to justify tiny, pointless details in a show that is already full of absurdities, as if debating soccer preferences somehow redeems the lazy writing. A lot of commenters are not ready for the last episode. Oh, I certainly am. One more episode and we are finally done with this dumpster fire of an arc. Just one more episode of pointless filler, forced drama, and shallow emotion before we can move on and never have to think about any of this ever again. A lot of people thought that the writing was amazing and that the author has gotten better as a writer. They are glad they kept on watching this show. Really? They actually thought that this mess was good? Wow, their standards must be 6 feet under. It is incredible that anyone could praise lazy plotting, forced emotion, and endless plot conveniences as if it were quality storytelling. A lot of people said the show made them shed tears and that the quality of this season is so much better than the first. That is laughable. They actually bought into the fake drama, hollow dialogue, and forced manipulation, thinking it was emotional or meaningful. It is amazing how easily the show tricks people into feeling something that was never earned. And it just proves how shallow and unconvincing the writing really is. Some people felt that the anime improved so much because of this arc, and now they are even convinced to read the light novels. But what about this arc was so great? It is full of filler, forced emotion, lazy writing, and ridiculous plot conveniences. There is nothing in it that demonstrates improvement or skill. It is baffling that anyone could point to this as a highlight, and it just goes to show how low the standards are for praising Sword Art Online. This commenter was complaining about how people always find something to complain about. Damn right, I will complain about this show because it is terrible. It is not hard at all to find a plethora of things to complain about. Lazy writing, forced drama, inconsistent rules, shallow characters, and endless plot conveniences. Every scene seems designed to frustrate the audience. So pointing out the flaws is not nitpicking, it is stating the obvious. It is also ironic that this person is complaining about people who are complaining about the show. I could say the same thing back to them. You people are always complaining about others who are complaining and always find something to praise no matter how awful it is. Blindly defending lazy writing, forced drama, and ridiculous plot holes does not make the show good. It just makes you ignore reality. Pointing out the problems is the only reasonable response to this dumpster fire of an arc. This commenter feels like a monster for not crying or getting too emotional. They could tell what was going to happen from a mile away. So when it did, they did not feel anything. Do not worry, buddy. I feel the same way. You are not a monster. The show is just terrible at earning emotion, and anyone with a brain can see that the heartfelt moments are forced and hollow. There's nothing to get emotional about this train wreck. If that makes me a monster, then so be it. Baby, I am a monster. The show throws cheap sadness and obvious setups at the viewer and expects tears on command, but it never earns a single one. Feeling nothing here is not a lack of empathy. It is just basic media literacy. This commenter does not think the show was structured well. They feel that the bonding between Asuna and Yuki should have happened before viewers found out that Yuki was terminal. Then it would have made more sense for Asuna to care so much about losing contact with her. I agree with them. Asuna barely knows anything about Yuki, so it does not make sense why she is suddenly so attached. The rushed timeline and lack of real character development make the emotional stakes feel forced and unearned. This commenter feels the show is not Sword Art Online anymore. They liked the first arc of the first season, but now nothing really interesting is happening. I agree with them. Sword Art Online is supposed to be about surviving a high-stakes virtual reality death game, not this boring, hollow melodrama. The focus on trivial school drama, forced emotions, and meaningless filler completely strips away the tension, excitement, and stakes that made the series worth watching in the first place. This commenter is not a fan of Sword Art Online and is only watching because they feel obligated. They hate how the show expects them to care about characters and events without giving any real reason to do so. I agree with them. Nothing about this show earns your attention or investment. The characters are shallow, the drama is forced, and the plot is full of conveniences and filler. It constantly demands emotions from the audience that it has done nothing to deserve. The guy got 3 down votes, but he is absolutely right. It is sad and pathetic how the fans swarm anyone with a different opinion, shutting down criticism just because it does not match their blind praise. Instead of engaging thoughtfully, they attack people for pointing out the flaws of the series, which just shows how toxic and unquestioning the fanbase can be. If they did not like his comment, then they are definitely not going to like my video bashing this arc. But that is exactly why I have to keep making them. The fans do not deserve a monopoly over opinions about the show. Someone has to call out the lazy writing, forced drama, and ridiculous plot conveniences. And I'm not going to let blind praise go unchallenged. Once again, my video on this episode is many times longer than the episode itself. Even though pretty much nothing happened, I was still able to criticize it in detail. That just shows how packed this episode is with lazy writing, pointless filler, and ridiculous plot conveniences. There's so much wrong that it takes far longer to break it down than it does to actually watch it. A 20-minute episode should not give me enough material to rant about it for over an hour, and yet here we are. That is how catastrophically bad this show is. Every single moment is dripping with lazy writing, pointless filler, forced drama, and plot conveniences so ridiculous they could double as comedy. Nothing happens organically, nothing makes sense, and the writers clearly expect the audience to just sit there and take it. It is astonishing how much nonsense they can cram into such a short episode, and somehow the fans eat it up like it is a gourmet meal. I could probably spend twice as long ripping apart this nonsense and still barely scratch the surface of its failures. The fans are absolutely delusional. This is the arc they consider the best, their so-called gold standard, and yet it is a bloated mess of lazy writing, forced drama, and endless filler that barely qualifies as storytelling. Plot conveniences hit harder than a wrecking ball, emotional beats are slapped on like stickers, and the characters behave like cardboard cutouts. Honestly, it is laughable that anyone could hold this up as a highlight of the series. Their taste is so bad it should come with a warning label. Caution, low standards ahead. Why is this the show that the fans decide to worship? Out of millions of choices, this is the one they picked. A series full of lazy writing, forced drama, plot holes, and hollow emotional manipulation somehow became their gold standard. It is baffling, frustrating, and honestly, kind of sad that so many people treat this dumpster fire as a masterpiece when it is clearly a mess from start to finish. The Sword Art Online fans really need to grow up and see the world as it really is. This show is garbage. It is not the best of all time like they claim. It is full of lazy writing, forced drama, ridiculous plot conveniences, and hollow emotional manipulation. Idolizing this mess as if it were a masterpiece just shows how blind and deluded some fans can be. Many Sword Art Online fans treat the series as flawless, worshipping it like it is some untouchable masterpiece. They ignore lazy writing, forced drama, and glaring plot holes, and anyone who dares point them out is immediately labeled a hater. This blind devotion turns criticism into a personal attack and creates an echo chamber where bad storytelling is celebrated rather than challenged. The defense tactics of the fanbase are toxic. Fans will harass, insult, or belittle anyone who criticizes the show, often targeting people over minor observations. Instead of discussing legitimate flaws, they attack the messenger, making it impossible to have a civil conversation about the many problems of the show. Fans overpraise the shallowest aspects of the show, hyping trivial details or contrived emotional beats as if they are evidence of genius writing. Meanwhile, they ignore the most fundamental problems, rushed relationships, inconsistent world building, and absurd conveniences that would break any other story. Kirito and Asuna are idolized to ridiculous extremes. Fans act as if these characters are flawless icons, overlooking how shallow, inconsistent, and illogical they are. This pedestal mentality encouraged the writers to keep giving the audience lazy, convenient plot points instead of developing the characters in a meaningful way. Some fans act entitled and gatekeep the fandom, claiming that anyone who critiques the series is not a real fan. This elitist attitude creates a toxic environment where people are scared to speak honestly and discourse is monopolized by people defending mediocrity with no evidence. The fanbase also loves to obsess over pointless debates. They will argue over shipping wars, minor technicalities, or hypothetical what-if scenarios while completely ignoring major storytelling flaws. This shows they are willing to engage obsessively with the series, but only on a surface level that avoids confronting the real problems. They defend inexcusable plot holes with absurd reasoning. Kirito inventing advanced technology, Yuki surviving years of full dive, and impossible relationship speedruns are all excused as part of the story or suspension of disbelief, even though these moments make zero logical sense. Fans actively ignore reality to justify nonsense. Finally, the idolization of manipulative emotional scenes is relentless. Hollow, forced drama is praised as if it were brilliant storytelling, teaching the writers that they do not need to earn emotion. They can just tell the audience how to feel. This reinforces the laziness of the show and keeps the cycle of shallow, manipulative content going. The more the dumb Sword Art Online fans praise this dumpster fire, the more I have to bash it. Criticism exposes the lazy writing that Sword Art Online keeps throwing at the audience. The show pads boring filler scenes, repeats the same tired dialogue, and rushes the plot so much that it barely makes sense. Pointing this out shows just how weak the storytelling really is. Criticism points out the countless plot holes and inconsistencies. Characters do impossible things. Relationships happen in seconds and technology appears out of nowhere. If nobody spoke up, all of this nonsense would just slide by as if it were normal. Criticism calls out the forced drama. The show tries to make people cry or feel sad by just telling them how they should feel. It never earns the emotion, and manipulating the audience like this should be called out. Criticism encouraged better storytelling in the future. Writers and studios can see what does not work and maybe try harder to make plots, characters, and emotional moments that make sense and actually matter. Criticism protects new viewers. Not everyone has watched enough anime to see through the lies. Pointing out the flaws warns people before they waste time idolizing a show full of nonsense. Criticism holds the fandom accountable. Sword Art Online has one of the worst fan bases that will attack anyone who points out the problems. Speaking up reminds people that blindly defending mediocrity is not okay. Criticism promotes critical thinking about media. By analyzing the show, viewers learn to question choices, logic, and character actions. It makes people smarter and less likely to be fooled by lazy storytelling. Criticism prevents normalizing bad habits. The show keeps using cheap tricks, like telling people to feel sad instead of earning it. Criticism pushes back against those lazy shortcuts and says that bad habits in writing are not acceptable. Criticism encourages honest discussion. Instead of mindless praise, people can talk about the story, characters, and world in a meaningful way. This makes the conversation around anime better for everyone. Criticism preserves the value of storytelling. It reminds the audience that good stories require effort, consistency, and real emotional impact. Without criticism, shows like Sword Art Online get away with being flashy but empty. The Sword Art Online fans do not like me. And you know what? I do not need or want their approval. Their blind worship, toxic defense of the series, and refusal to see the glaring flaws only proves why criticism is necessary in the first place. I am not here to win them over. I am here to call out this dumpster fire for exactly what it is. We are almost done. Just one miserable episode to go. One episode until this nightmare of an arc finally drags itself to a close, and we can stop wasting our time on this bloated, hollow mess. Every second of this train wreck has been a lesson in lazy writing, forced drama, and ridiculous plot conveniences. And soon we can finally breathe knowing it is over. The finish line is in sight. I feel like Heracles about to complete his final labor. Or Odysseus about to finally return back home to Ithaca after 20 long years. Exhausted, battered, and fed up, knowing that one last grueling challenge stands between me and freedom. This arc has been a relentless trial of bad writing, hollow drama, and endless nonsense, and soon, mercifully, it will be over. Until I remember that there are still countless more arcs and movies in this franchise that I also have to rip apart. It is like being trapped in a cruel time loop, forced to relive one bad storyline after another, endlessly pointing out lazy writing, ridiculous plot holes, and hollow drama while the fans keep blindly cheering for it. There is no escape, only more disappointment waiting around every corner. Sword Art Online is not good. It never was good, and it never will be good. Every arc is filled with lazy writing, forced drama, absurd plot holes, and hollow emotional manipulation. No amount of fan worship, flashy animation, or recycled tropes can change the fact that this series is a mess from start to finish. There is nothing worth crying about in this arc. Like the song by The Weeknd, "Save Your Tears for Another Day." The drama is hollow. The emotional moments are forced. And the show keeps trying to make you feel something for situations that are completely meaningless. Wasting energy on this nonsense is pointless. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Sword Art Online hate content. More deep dives into its lazy writing, forced drama, and ridiculous plot holes are coming, and you do not want to miss the next episode of ripping this dumpster fire apart.